My roommate thought I left for the weekend. What she did when alone left me speechless. I want to get something out of the way immediately. When people hear a story that starts with my roommate thought she was alone, they imagine one of two things. The first is something embarrassing. The second is something worse. What Kara did when she thought I had gone was neither of those things. What she did was sit on the kitchen floor in the dark with her back against the cabinet under the sink and talk to me. To a photograph of me, to be precise. One I did not know she had. She talked to it for about 4 minutes in the specific quiet way people talk when they are certain no one is listening. I heard most of it from the hallway. I have not been the same since. I am not entirely certain I am supposed to be. My name is Joel Adeyemi. I am 33. I design wayfinding systems, the signage architecture inside hospitals, airports, transit hubs. I spend my professional life deciding how to help people find where they are going, which my sister once observed was a deeply ironic occupation for someone who spent most of his personal life standing at the same crossroads without moving. I did not ask her to elaborate. She elaborated anyway. I live in a 2-bedroom flat in Bethnal Green, which I have shared for the last 14 months with Kara Novak, who answered my listing with a message that was 3 sentences long, confirmed she had no pets and no irregular hours, and arrived on moving day with more books than furniture, which told me most of what I needed to know. She is 31. She teaches secondary school history 2 bus stops away, and comes home with the particular tiredness of someone who has spent 6 hours being the most competent person in the room, and found it more draining than exhilarating. She has a habit of reading at the kitchen table rather than the sofa, which I could not explain until she told me, around month 3, that she liked being near the kettle in case she wanted tea without having to decide to want tea. I found this completely logical. I found this completely logical more interesting than the logic itself. She kept a small cactus on the windowsill above the sink, named after a Byzantine emperor, Justinian, she said, because he had survived impossible conditions and outlasted everyone's expectations. The cactus had been slightly overwatered the month before she moved in, and was, she reported with confidence, in recovery. We had been good flatmates. The functional kind that slide into something closer without either party filing the paperwork. We covered each other's grocery gaps. We watched the same documentary series and didn't discuss it until the other had also finished. She proofread my client presentations once, when I mentioned offhandedly that I was unhappy with one of the section headings, and returned it with a single note in the margin, "This is the right word, you're just afraid to use it," which was accurate about the heading and possibly about several other things. I told myself we were friends, good ones, the kind that arrive unexpectedly from a flatmate listing and become something reliable. I told myself this was the full extent of it. I had been telling myself this for approximately 11 months when I came home on the wrong evening. The plan had been simple: a weekend in Edinburgh, my college friend Dan, a long-deferred visit, a Friday afternoon train. I had told Kara on Wednesday. She had nodded, said, "Have a good time," and asked me to bring back a particular shortbread tin she liked if I happened to pass a tourist shop. I said I would. She returned to her book. Friday came. I packed. I locked my bedroom door. I left. I got to St. Pancras 20 minutes before departure, found my platform, and checked my bag, at which point I discovered I had packed around my laptop charger and not with it. The specific packing error of someone who has a habit of leaving it on the kitchen counter because the outlet there is more convenient. The train left without me. I rebooked for Saturday morning, texted Dan, and came home. It was 7:48 in the evening. The flat was dark except for the kitchen, which had the particular quality of a room lit only by the light above the hob. The kind of light you leave on when you're not really in a room, but want the company of it. I opened the front door quietly, out of the instinct of someone returning to a shared space late, and heard her voice. She was talking at a low, even pitch, the register she used when she was not performing anything for anyone. I had heard it exactly twice before. Once through her bedroom door during a phone call with someone she was clearly comforting, and once at the kitchen table at midnight during a week I later understood had been a difficult one. I stopped in the hallway. I could not make out every word, not at first. What I could make out was the tone, unhurried, honest in the way people are honest in empty rooms, and the word you, recurring. And then, as I stood very still because moving in either direction felt equally wrong, a full sentence, clear enough. I keep thinking I should just say it while you're here. And then you're here, and I don't. A pause. Then, quieter. You make the flat feel like somewhere I chose, instead of somewhere I landed. I didn't know that was a thing I needed until you. Something in my chest stopped pretending it had been uninvolved this whole time. I stood in the hallway for several more seconds, in which several things happened at once. I understood what the photograph was. The one from Dan's birthday dinner 4 months ago. The one where I had been mid-laugh at something across the table and had not known anyone was taking it. I understood that she had kept it. I understood, fully and without the usual editorial process, that I had been explaining this flatmate situation to myself with the calibrated inaccuracy of someone who knew the correct answer and had decided not to write it down. Then the light in the kitchen shifted, and Kara's voice stopped, and I heard, very clearly, the sound of someone who has realized she is not alone. She appeared in the kitchen doorway, holding the photograph face down against her chest, in the manner of a woman who has just had the floor removed from under her and is deciding, in real time, how to respond to the architecture of the situation. She looked at me. I looked at her. The flat was very quiet. She said, "You were supposed to be in Edinburgh." I said, "I forgot my charger." She said, "Your charger." I said, "It's on the counter." She looked at the counter. The charger was on the counter. She looked back at me. I want to be accurate about what happened on her face in the following seconds, because it is the part I have thought about most. It was not embarrassment, exactly. It was something closer to the expression of a person who has been keeping a careful and private account and has just discovered that the account has been audited. The careful part. And then, underneath the careful part, when she understood I was not going to say something wrong, something dismissive or surprised or careless, something else. Something that had been waiting with considerable patience. She said, "How long were you standing there?" I said, "Long enough." She closed her eyes for a moment, opened them. She was still holding the photograph. I said, "You don't have to say anything. I'll get the charger, and tomorrow I'll get the train, and on Sunday you can have the flat, and we will never have to." She said, "Don't." That was all. One syllable, with the weight of 11 months behind it. I crossed the kitchen. The hob light was still on. Justinian the cactus was on the windowsill where he had always been. She did not step back. I stopped in front of her, and she was looking at me with the look from the doorway, the one that had stopped performing, and her hand, the one not holding the photograph, was at her side and not moving. I said, "Kara." She said, "I know." I said, "I'm going to say it while I'm here, because I think you were right, that we keep not doing that." She breathed in once. Then she said, "You make this feel like somewhere I chose." Her voice was quiet, unhurried, the same register as the empty room. I told that to a photograph of you, and I meant it then, and I mean it more now. I reached over and took the photograph out of her hand, gently, and set it face up on the counter. Then I took her hand, the one that had been holding it, and she turned her fingers so they were properly in mine. We stood in the kitchen under the hob light and said nothing for a moment. The flat around us was exactly what it had been for 14 months. The books she had carried in, the cactus on the windowsill, the outlet by the counter I used every morning. And none of it had changed, except that all of it had been confirmed. Then she said very quietly, "You forgot your charger." I said, deliberately. She laughed, the real laugh, the one I had a complete inventory of by now without meaning to keep one. "You did not." "No, I didn't. I'm genuinely this incompetent." She laughed again, and her head dropped briefly, and I put my arm around her, and she leaned into it the way people lean into things they have been pretending not to want for a long time. The Edinburgh train left the following morning with me on it. Dan was delighted. I brought back the shortbread tin. I may have looked for it with slightly more intention than I would have 12 hours earlier, which Dan noticed and commented on in the specific way of a friend who is extremely pleased with himself for noticing. 3 months later, she rearranged the bookshelf into a system she had apparently been conceiving for some time and asked me where I wanted my things put. I said she could decide. She put them on the second shelf, which is the one that's easiest to reach. I noticed this. I did not mention it. I did not need to. A year after that, when people asked about us, how we met, how it started, which question they were really asking, she would say, "He came home when he wasn't supposed to." And then she would add. After a pause she had calibrated precisely, which he's been doing ever since. I would say, she was talking to a photograph of me in the dark, and everything she said was true, and I understood I had been too precise about what kind of thing this was. Justinian is still on the windowsill. He has, against reasonable expectation, continued to thrive. Nothing between us was ever really hidden. It was simply waiting in the flat, quietly, for one of us to come home at the wrong time on purpose. What would you have done if you came home and heard someone say exactly that about you when they thought you were gone? And have you ever kept something small, a photo, an object, that you told yourself was nothing, but you knew meant something? Tell me in the comments. If this one stayed with you, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.